What's going on, guys? I'm Zach from the Lumiose Post, where we talk about all things Pokemon, and today we gotta talk about this. It's pretty clear that I am a Kalos fan. I mean, my name is Lumiose Post, which, you know, Lumiose, that's a city in Kalos, so clearly I must have liked it some to name myself after that. And I do. XY is my favorite game. And oh my goodness, I get comments all the time about, hey, XY sucks. Hey, I can't watch you because you like XY, all this. And, you know, I try to be fair. I think that I have to level and say X and Y could have been much better games. In fact, I know I can say that because we know what the games were originally, and they were kind of insane. So let's get into it. So to preface this, obviously this has not really been confirmed. The thing about scrap stuff from games is that no developer's actually going to come out and say, hey, this is legit. So we'll never know if this was true, but a lot of it kind of lines up with what we know and really honestly makes sense. I feel like we also always talk about beta Pokemon and kind of like this was scrapped, that was scrapped, this was originally this typing, whatever. And we never talk about, like, actual things that were cut from the games, like content, plot-wise, that kind of stuff. And that's what we're talking about today. Now, I will preface this by saying this is from 4chan, and you all know the kind of mess that can be. So let's just, you know, read it and enjoy it, because I do think they make some compelling cases that could make this believable. So the person calls themselves XY Cider, and they posted this on March 4th of 2014. So to give you a kind of timeline, that's about 4 or 5 months after the release of Pokemon X and Y. Hi, I'm XY Cider, and I've come today with some interesting information regarding the development of Pokemon X and Y I've gathered from sources within GameFreak, some currently working there, some former members who went on to other projects after XY, planned content and elements for XY early on that were cut due to time constraints or dropped for other reasons. The information mainly pertains to plot elements and original character designs that never materialize and probably will never resurface in future installments, and it varies from elements that were merely drafted out on paper to some elements that actually made it into the game for a bit being cut. This information has been obtained through secondhand sources by me and thus may not be entirely accurate, more along the lines of speculation of what could have been, but is an interesting read for those of you interested in behind-the-scenes info, which I am. First off, I'll state that, as many people have suggested, XY did indeed suffer from being rushed, although the amount of new Pokemon was not actually part of this. So, timeline again, Unova had released like 155, 156, something like that, new Pokemon, and X and Y released 72, not including Mega Evolutions, just brand new Pokemon, 72 new Pokemon, and people were pretty upset about that. 72 is less than half of 155, or 6, whatever it was, so that was pretty upsetting, and a lot of people suggested it was because the games were rushed and had to be a deadline, and they scrapped Pokemon. It was decided early on, due to the focus on creating 3D models and the amount of new Pokemon added a few years before in BW, that XY would have a small amount of Pokemon. That actually makes sense. You know, you do always alternate gens in, like, the amount of Pokemon. So Kanto had 151, Johto only brought in 100, Unova went back up to, like, 137, something like that, and then Sinnoh went back down to, like, 110, 111, something like that. Instead, mainly the rush to have the game out in 2013 was at the loss of much of the game's planned plot elements, which is why the final version feels so fragmented. Furthermore, quite a few areas that were planned were also cut. There were also numerous gameplay features planned and then dropped, but information on these are more tight-lipped since they may be used in future games. Now, the area things makes a ton of sense. There's a lot of areas that are kind of like, look like they should be accessible, but are not. Like, for example, the power plant in route, I don't even know the Kalos route names off the top of my head, but the desert with the power plant, a lot of those doors are locked, and a lot of people figure there was probably something there that was ultimately scrapped. Anyway, here's a basic list of cut content I've learned about, starting with plot, then characters, and then Pokemon themselves. Here we go. The first real solid draft for XY's plotline had a strong paranormal blend, and was quite unlike anything Pokemon had seen involving actual aliens. Now, remember, Following this gen was Pokemon Sun and Moon, which brought aliens in, Ultra Beasts. It was very heavy on that plot, so that's kind of believable that they didn't get to do it because they were rushed for time, and so they ended up pushing it to the next game. The main plot would involve Team Flare, whose appearance was originally intended to bring back the classic Men in Black style characters. Aliens posing as weird, unorthodox humans slowly taking Kalos society and plotting to destroy Earth. Team Flare definitely gives the Men in Black vibes, so that is totally believable. Sycamore and Lysander at one point were the same character, the former being a scientist who was exposed to a space rock, with the Lysander half being the aliens' leader taking control of him. Looker also had a bigger role investigating the aliens during the main plot. So this all makes sense. Looker plays roles in every game, and he did end up playing a role in XY, just in the post-game with this kind of subplot or whatever. But the bit about Lysander and Sycamore, that is really neat if true. Lysander would basically possess Sycamore, and they'd switch between personalities, very dissociative identity disorder, Moon Knight, all that fun stuff. So, very interesting. Then it says that AZ was also intended to be one of these aliens. Again, very believable because AZ is super freaking tall, right? And, come to think of it, Lysander is also very tall. So maybe that was what they were going for, where the aliens were tall. He had traveled to Earth in the past in order to destroy it due to the violent war that was occurring. So kind of a different situation. AZ, instead of ending a violent war that his region was in, he would be ending Earth because it was having a violent war. But he had a change of heart upon meeting Floette. Living in exile on Earth as a wanderer, he aged slower than normal humans because, he's an alien. The plot would have had Team Flare searching for him since he holds the key to the super weapon that can destroy Earth. Like in the final version, but in this version, it was the flower the special Floette holds that was the key, which kind of makes sense, because, why else would they make this Floette special? Because, it didn't play a role in the game. There was nothing really explained about why it was special. It was just kind of, hey, this is Eternal Flower Floette, which is different from the other Floettes, and you need to just accept that, right? Very weird. The two were not separated in this version, but remained friends, so, that's kind of sweet. Xerneas and Yveltal were also alien life forms initially, and were basically living super weapons, as opposed to being the power source for the weapon like in the final version. That's not too hard to believe. I mean, Yveltal really is essentially a super weapon. It talks about in the Pokedex how whenever he, goes to his slumber, he kills everything, and then goes to sleep, so, Then the Mega Stones were also of alien origin, with pieces of AZ's spaceship that spread across Earth when he landed, and the original idea for Mega Evolutions was much more alien in appearance, with elements akin to Deoxys suggesting he had hailed from the same alien planet. That is so cool, and I want fan art of this right now, right? That's really neat. And it also kind of makes you guess where the Delta Emerald plot could have gone. Imagine if this was the original plot of X and Y. Delta episode would have been so different. It would have been really, really neat. Fairy-type Pokemon had more plot presence, an idea that they'd be aliens from the moon who came to Earth even further in the past and had learned to live with humans in peace, but this idea never materialized, and it was decided there would simply just be a new type classification, no backstory. Furthering this, Diantha was intended to be one of those more benevolent moon aliens, their leader. Makes sense. Diantha uses a fairy type, also it would kind of explain why Gardevoir is the fairy type. Also, it makes sense they all came from the moon, because, Clefairy was the OG fairy type, right? And it was always said to come from the moon. This drafted plot just was deemed a bit too weird, with paranormal elements were rewrote into more mystical elements, which were then further scaled back due to development time, ending up focused more so on the 3D models and other features as opposed to plot elements. So this makes sense. They cut content for the 3D models. We complained about it, and then what did they do in Sword and Shield? They cut the 3D models, citing plot elements and features and content as the reason for doing so. So that kind of, makes sense. That's why they chose to do that, is because we complained about when they did the opposite of that, right? For instance, right up until the end, the plot point of Lysander being Sycamore's alter ego, although simply a disguise as opposed to alien possession, as opposed to his college buddy, was still planned, but they were eventually cut into two separate characters. The group of friends who came across as mostly extraneous, I can't read, in the final version originally were intended to showcase a feature where players could form teams among other real-world players. These teams basically combine their various stats together, like how many Pokemon they caught, battle scores, etc., and the NPC friends would basically be an in-game version serving as a tutorial for this feature. This idea didn't make it in the final version, but the friends were kept in regardless to make things more lively. Great. Now here is the one thing that I kind of think throws this off. At one point in development, there was a planned Year of Luigi content requested by Nintendo, which was the original purpose of the Scary House on Route 14. The story the man would tell you would be the plot of Luigi's Mansion, with the game theme playing, and in the end, a Boo would jump out and scare the characters. The Scary House was created, but in the end, the team decided the cameo by Boo would possibly confuse children who might think it could be caught in the game, and the cameo fell off, with Nintendo eventually deciding to drop the idea of placing Year of the Luigi content in the game. The Scary House had been modeled, and the team liked the basic idea behind it, so it remained without the Luigi's Mansion stuff. Now, I will say this, Scary House always felt weird to me, always felt like it was nothing, and should have been more, could have been more, would have been more. But Luigi? You know? Nah, I don't buy that. Okay, moving forward. One of the original ideas for the gym leaders really early on was that they'd be based on sports professions. In addition to Karina and Grant, who retained this idea in the final version, for example, the grass gym leader was a rodeo rider who rode go-goats instead of an old man with giant scissors. And the ice gym leader was a surfer who surfed atop Avalugg. In the end, this idea was dropped and the gym leaders had more diverse roles. Viola and Alexa were present in the original Aliens draft, with Viola being a ghost gym leader who uses her camera to capture paranormal occurrences. Alexa was planned to be a missing character who disappeared years ago, presumably abducted. When the alien plot was dropped, Viola was still a ghost gym leader who searched for ghosts on film, with Alexa being turned into a more professional journalist. Ghost was deemed too hard to be the first gym, so Viola was reworked into a more naturalist bug-type photographer. Dude, I'd love a paranormal investigator as, like, a Pokemon gym leader. That'd be so cool. Like, get us Ryan and Shane from The Watcher on this, right? Like, absolutely. I'm there for it. Grant and Karina were the first two gym leaders, really designed during the sports stage, and more or less stayed the same, although Karina was given the role of the Mega Pokemon prodigy later on. Weirdest of all, Grant was originally wheelchair-bound, with strong upper arm strength, which he used to climb rock. That's very upsetting if true, because, like, you know, representation of, you know, someone in a wheelchair, that would have been super cool. Like, have we ever gotten that in Pokemon? Anime doesn't count here. Have we gotten that in the games? I don't think we have. Correct me in the comments below. Clement and Bonnie were switched. Originally, Bonnie was the eldest sibling, Clement the little brother, but the team felt that the younger design was a bit too similar to Trevor's, so they made Clement the older character. A lost plot point still visible in the final version, but never explicitly stated, is that Clement had designed the equipment Lysander uses in the final battle, its original purpose being less malevolent, however. So, you know, Lysander has those, like, gears that come out, and they're very similar to Clement's Apom arms, so that's not hard to believe. That's actually really cool. Then we have Ramos and Wulfric seem to have evolved from the rodeo rider and surfer and aged to stand out. Wulfric was going to have a larger role in the final version involving Mewtwo, but it was cut. Again, believable. You first meet Wulfric at the Pokemon Village, which is where you catch Mewtwo later on. Olympia was one of the gym leaders to be created. Once the basic framework of the present main plot was created with all the alien stuff exercised, and was planned to have a much larger role in the Team Flare plot, involving her being connected to the legendaries, which was ultimately cut down to a flat character. She also had a more androgynous character design, but her feminine features were made more prominent. It's pretty believable that she was going to play a bigger role in the story. She kind of played a pretty huge role in the story in the anime, so pretty believable. Also, I skipped a line. Valerie's design is a leftover of the original alien lifeform idea planned for Diantha, given a weird, unnatural appearance, although she's not necessarily an alien in the final version, since that plot doesn't exist. which, again, makes sense. You know, Valerie has the, like, bug anime kawaii girl eyes, and Sylveon has that too, which kind of adds to it being a fairy type and being an alien. All that makes sense to me. The Elite Four didn't go through any major changes that I heard of, although Malva originally wasn't associated with Team Flare during the initial Aliens plot, and Cybele was a younger woman, but likely changed to have an even distribution of genders. A few more Mega Evolutions were planned, but the decision was made to drop them as it was felt introducing too many Mega Pokemon at once would cheapen the new mechanic, and the design team was a bit apprehensive over how well the mechanic would go over with new fans. At this point, the team feels positive, and is likely more Mega Pokemon will appear in the future, with better implementation and a more risky approach towards altering existing Pokemon's playstyles. This would go on to happen in Pokemon Oris, so again, kind of a point towards this XY Cider guy. Fennekin originally had a more feminine design throughout its evolutions. Braixen remains the closest to its original, and was intended to be Fire Fairy at one point, but it was decided making one of the starters a brand new type would offset the balance, so it was changed to Fire Psychic. We have still yet to get a Fire Fairy, so thanks, GameFreak. Furthermore, Chestnut was originally meant to be Grass Steel, but in the end was changed to Grass Fighting to better balance the starters. Froakie is probably the least changed starter, as it was always more or less intended to be the ninja we ended up with. Chestnut being Grass Steel is totally believable to me. Pyroar was originally going to have more differences between the genders besides appearance, but that idea was carried over into the Meowstic duo instead. It would have been weird if two cats were like kind of the same thing in the game, so I'm glad they did that. The original Flabebe and Evolution designs had much more plant-like elements beyond the flower, and were actually to be fairy grass, but the latter type was dropped as grass Pokemon already filled out a lot of the decks, and its design was changed to reflect this. This actually makes sense because not the first time Game Freak's done it. Basculin were added in Unova just because Game Freak felt they needed more water types. Floette was actually designed before Flabebe and Florges were, with the intention of being AZ's signature Pokemon, and otherwise a weird one-off Pokemon, but was reworked into a 3-stage line that would be one of the headlining fairy Pokemon. Again, kind of believable because the Floette thing just seems so random with AZ. Riding on Rhyhorn was one of the first features implemented as a way to experiment with the layout of the overworld layout and how players could interact with the new 3DS maps, with Skiddo and Go-Go designed afterwards when it was decided to create new Pokemon that show off this feature. The feature ended up going on the back burner as it isn't important in the final game, and at one point riding Pokemon were meant to completely replace the bike, but this proved difficult to do. Again, makes sense because they would go on to do exactly this in Pokemon Sun and Moon, the next 3DS gen, not game because there was Oris, but it was the next 3DS like new gen, right? Inkay's evolution method was actually something the team wanted to do for a long time, a Pokemon that evolves in response to real-world motion. Inspired by the unique carts used for Kirby Tilt and Tumble, and WarioWare Shake It, but it was deemed too expensive to manufacture such a cart for one Pokemon's evolution method. The 3DS's built-in motion sensor allowed them to finally incorporate this idea. Although Inkay itself was a new creation, there have been many suggested ideas in the past for such a Pokemon that responds to emotion that were quite different. I could totally see like Hitmontop being like, you spin around, and it doesn't. Wonder why they didn't do that with Milcery. They should have made us like actually spin to evolve Milcery. Sylveon more or less was responsible for the fairy type. The team wanted a new type to balance out Dragon, but had difficulty deciding on what it'd be and how to represent it. Thus, it was decided to use the idea of an evolution, a simplistic Pokemon that does a good job representing each type it's given, to test out various concepts. There were many ideas, but Sylveon, the fairy type, ultimately won, and thus ideas on weaknesses and resistance grew from there. Sylveon's original design was a bit more fairy-like, though, with actual wings, but these were changed to streamers when the team realized players might think it's flying type at first appearance. And what's funny is people actually still thought it was flying type at first appearance. I remember that. But yeah, I really like this idea. I don't know how believable it is, but I really like the idea that like Sylveon was made just kind of because they were like, we need a new type, design a bunch of evolutions, and we'll pick it from there. I love that thought. The original Hawlucha design had more humanoid elements, but was deemed a bit too weird and startling, as its appearance suggested it was actually a man dressed as a Pokemon, so it was redesigned to be more bird-like, and its wrestling outfit integrated into its body. I wonder if its original design ended up becoming Professor Kukui, because the whole royal mask thing. That'd be pretty funny, but probably not. Hopefully not. Originally, for example, it was clearly wearing a mask over its head instead of simply being the pattern on its feathers, and had a belt around its waist. The Gumi line, like Flabebe, was also not monotyped at first, but Dragon Water, but the latter was removed when the amount of water Pokemon was deemed too much and more balance was needed. Its design was made to be a bit more solid as well. Originally, it was a bit more watery and slightly transparent. That depresses me. I'm not gonna lie to you, but I do love Goodra now. So we're good, Game Freak. We're good. At one point in XY's development, there was planned to be a town that rested atop a giant Avalugg floating in a frozen ocean, and there would be a segment where you could ride atop a smaller Avalugg across the water as well, but both these scenarios never came to be, and the snow area of Kalos was landlocked instead. Noibat and Noivern's similarities to Woobat and Swoobat aren't completely coincidental. The designs were created during the production of Gem 5 as one of the ideas for a new bat Pokemon to serve as Univa's Zubat equivalent, alongside Woobat and Swoobat, and a few other bat designs which were never materialized. Woobat and Swoobat were ultimately picked, but the team liked Noibat and Noivern, so decided to change them up a bit and put them in XY. Xerneas and Yveltal were actually switched in terms of colors. Originally, Xerneas would be red, Yveltal blue, but the team decided to change things up a bit since red as the primary color and blue as the secondary color had already been used with Ruby and Sapphire, and two Americans also used with red and blue. Zygarde was one of the last Pokemon implemented. Originally, it was planned that he wouldn't appear to the players. He'd be included for future connectivity in the data, so like a mythical, but would merely be hinted at. This idea was shot down due to difficulty of keeping things such a secret in the internet age and was placed in the game. The dungeon he appears in was actually intended to be where Mewtwo was found, but it's instead ended up in a new area that was made for Mewtwo and Pokemon Village. In early stages of development, Diancie was intended to be an actual evolution of Carbink, but this was changed as Diancie's design was altered a bit more and promoted to an event legendary. This was done around the same time it was decided Zygarde would be an in-game Pokemon and a new event Pokemon was needed to fill the gap. Kind of makes sense. Diancie is indeed tied to Carbink, as is, like, it talks about how it's like a macro evolution version of Carbink, right? He then was responding to someone who says, "Is there any source for the information you gave?" And he said, they have no proof of this, obviously. And then he said, everything he knows, like he mentioned, everything he knows is what he mentioned. And they may be used in future installments, but Game Freak's pretty strict on that getting out. As for evolutions and pre-evolutions, it seemed like they had always planned Megas as the new evolutions early on, so there were never planned to be any new evolutions other than Sylveon. So yeah, I know this is kind of a longer video, but I don't see a lot of people talking about this, and I think it's really cool. Could be fake, probably fake, because it's from 4chan, right? But I like to think of it as real, because it does have some really cool ideas. So on that note, let me know in the comments below what you think of this. Is it legit to you? Is it not? Points you like, points you hate, all that stuff in the comments below. Be sure to also like, subscribe, and hit the bell for notifications. Talk about all things Pokemon here, and you don't want to miss those videos, right? So hit that bell and hit that subscribe button and the thumbs up while you're at it. Until next time, I will see all of you later.